Welcome to episode 2 of The Brain Jar, a Counter-Strike 2 podcast. Currently just starring myself, but open to guests in the future where I'm not going to go over the entire thing. You can go check episode 1. I did a relatively brief 7-minute or so introduction to the general theme of the podcast. It's a 90, 50, 10 percentage based, three opinions. You start with the easy one, you go into a coin flip opinion, which could go either way, and then you end with a kind of strong opinion that you think you're the minority in believing it. And let's just start with a 90% take. Cloud9, the Russian super team formerly consisting of, initially the super team that was originated was Electronic, Perfecto, Shiro, Axile, and Hobbit, right? That's the original formation of the team with the removal of Nafany, which we'll get into. But the actual take is that Cloud9, this so-called super team, will continue to fail. That is, barely make playoffs, not really make a significant run, until either one roster move plus a resurfacing of a player, or 2 roster moves, right? That's the take. And I think it's fairly obvious, but let's just go into kind of the history, how we got here, where we're going, what actually is going on here. Starting with the origin of this super team, right? Now, most people, and rightfully so, called for Nafany's removal. Maui Snake was kind of the progenitor. He birthed this kind of Nafony mindset of calling out how his style was losing them games and holding them back, which was definitely true at the time. Now, of course, Nafany did find some success with his Bet Boom team and may continue to outperform C9 even. No one's saying that he can't redevelop and reform himself as a leader. And there were things that came out afterwards about how his leadership wasn't trusted and how he didn't have the say, and maybe players like Shiro and Hobbit and gla1ve as the coach, who's still there, by the way, had more say in the style of the team than perhaps he did. And that is a conversation for a different day, right? But they were removed from this team alongside Basta, who replaced ENCE, which is that 5-man squad with Nafany and ENCE, whom I'm sure people fell in love with starting from the COVID days until recently. There was a major turning point in the squad, right? That was when the super team came. And at that point, there were questions about Electronic's leadership, whether he was capable of helming or being at the helm of a team like this, because he was previously the in-game leader of Na'Vi, where Blade was kind of saying he can be better, but we kind of knew that there was a limit to how good he could be as an in-game leader, and his individual fragging was kind of limited to what he was. But there was still a lot of excitement for the position of this team, right? Because if you remember, at the time, Shiro and Axel were being essentially held back, right? Of that year, right, 2022, there were basically 2 of the top 5 players of the year at the time in CSGO, notable in CSGO, right? We'll get into it later. That was a primary hype that these guys are going to be as good as they were. The roles are going to make sense. The in-game leadership, it was like, do we even need that crazy of a calling? We have so many good players, right? At that point, it was basically plug and go, to put it in simple terms. And the first LAN had a substitute and they floundered in the playoffs, but this was their debut LAN at Cologne, I believe. And at this point, it was kind of clear Electronic's calling isn't great, right? But we all kind of knew this, and we all expected for the team to kind of come together. And I'm going to point at a key underperformance during the recent season of ESL Pro League, I believe. Season 18 or 17, the numbers are not important. It's recent as the date of this recording, right? They lost to teams like Complexity. Now, this Complexity in CSGO, not in CS2. They were improving at that point, but they were still far below what we expected from Cloud9. And they lost. This is the most egregious loss. They lost to a Liquid team. That team with Patsy and Rainwaker, which should not have been beating anyone. It was just horribly constructed from the beginning, right? And then they play once at Sydney and they go out dead last. This is in CS2. Shiro posts probably his worst numbers ever, right? I think I tweeted about this at the time. This may have been his worst event since years and years and years ago. Certainly historic in some sense, right? 0.96 for an AWPA, CS2 conversation notwithstanding. At the entire event, 0.96 is unforgivable for a player with the positions in the impact that we expect from Shiro. And then, surprisingly, Shiro benches himself from the lineup and Boomic comes in. The calling actually becomes noticeably better, in my opinion. We see a lot of mid-rounding in the T side. Now, that comes down to Electronic basically being back like he never left, finding exactly the impact that we knew he was capable of underneath that whole in-game leadership that he ended up taking on. And then all those interviews surface back, right? For like a year, he's talking about, oh, I can in-game lead, I can be the, I can transfer my skill. I always thought I could be an in-game leader, and then as soon as he gives it up, it's not for me, it's not where my destiny is. Like, as if we didn't know that already from the outside looking in. But anyway, his consistency as an individual comes back like in spades, right? You can just see he's never missed a beat in terms of CS2. He's just instantly back. That's not a conversation. We don't need to cut Electronic anytime soon, right? The calling gets better because Electronic is capable of secondary calling, especially in tandem with Boomic, which is, his best years in 2021 as a team player, especially, right? And so then you kind of have to get into the uncomfortable questions of what are the obvious flaws? What are the problems with this team? And we start with perhaps the most notable one, the one that anyone could tell you about. There's no AWP player on this team with the benching of Shiro. Now, not only does that mean, first of all, that there's no star AWP player, because if you look at teams, top 10, top 20, wherever you limit it, one of your two best players is going to always be your AWP, no matter what, right? Now, it may not always be your best player. We're seeing in CS2, Donk, in Spirit, maybe most notably, a top rifling talent with a half-decent AWPer. Arfrost had some great moments, especially in that boom event, that they ended up winning, but reportedly they knew he knew he was leaving at that point, and maybe he was, performing without pressure. You can call it what you want, right? But there was definitely no contest. Donk is the best player on that team, but the AWP is still second place. And so if you have no star AWP player, you're missing out on essentially easy money, easy numbers, because you have an AWP player. But the key point here is that there's no consistency and no backbone to a team, especially in CT setups, right? If you have an AWPer, you can just put the AWPer in a position, and it just gives you a lot more flexibility where you have CT setups that can utilize an AWPer in a certain position to just lock it down, right? You have, for example, B site on Inferno, right? If you're feeling like it's a tough rhythm, you don't have exactly what you want, you put your consistent AWPer there. You put Shiro there on the B site, who'll get you his one kill. It doesn't matter if he's, taken away from another place. You can put extra rifles there. You can even leave him alone, right? But if Boomic is your AWPer, I don't need to be, digging up stats to tell you this. Boomic is not an AWPer. Boomic can hit a couple AWP shots, not even in the style of an AWPer that you'd want, especially for this team that was so used to Shiro locking down angles and being consistent on a bomb site. Boomic can't do that. He can do stuff with the rifle, he can do crazy peeks. We've seen him win clutches already. And he should stick to that. He should not have to open this team, and that just absolutely destroys. T-side aside, they can run rifles on T-side. That's not a problem. That may even be better, right? But on CT side is the most notable missing point, where their setups just can't withstand the test of a regimented T-side against them, which will just take advantage of the fact that you can call the rotates, because you can't leave an AWP on a side consistently and believe that the AWP is going to take that position and just make it their own, because now you have Boomic as the AWPer. You can't just leave Boomic alone on a bomb site. What's going to happen there? He's going to get flashed. He's going to get taken out. It's not going to be good for the team. So you need another rifler. The entire setup falls apart compared to another team. For example, if you look at Falcons now, but previously ENCE, if you have some Pius, if you have Monesi, if you have ZywOo, we don't even need to talk about ZywOo. That's beyond comprehensible, right, for an individual. But you have players like this, and your team just makes itself way better. So that's step one, right? That's the obvious flaw in the team. There's no AWP and everything that comes with it. So that's obvious things in the kind of pool of problems that's going on in Cloud9 right now. The role shifts. Now, when this team started, we did have some questions. Who's going to be the aggressive team? Can we just put Axile and Hobbit, Exile, and Electronic as kind of aggressive players, but Exile's more of a passive player, and Perfecto's coming in. But we kind of said, let's let it kind of solve itself. There's so much star potential in this team. It should surely have no problems coming together. But this team that we have now is not the team that we had back when the star team was formed, especially in our minds. Think about the perception and reality of the squad, right? Exile. We had him as a top 5 player in CSGO. He is not a top 5 player in CS2, let me tell you that. Now, I'll give you the caveat. He has been improving in CS2. Event to event has been getting better and better. He's still a shadow of his former self. That's without a doubt, right? So Exile is not the player you can rely on yet. He's not a 1.2 approaching player. He's closer to 1.1. So we need to wait on that. As for now, I don't think he's there yet. He's good, he's not great. We'll put it that way, right? And so, Shiro's gone, obviously, and Boomich is not a fragger. He's a role player, if anything. He'll give you rounds, he won't give you, match-to-match numbers. And you can see, especially, like, if you're just tuning into a C9 game and it's like the, fourth quarter, to put it that way, like the second half of the second half, Boomich is just on, like, 7 and 16 somehow. And you're just like, well, how did this happen, He's not going to be giving you the output that you desire. And so where is the firepower on this team, right? Let's count it down member by member. You have Perfecto. He'll give you some clutches. He'll give you bomb-side consistency as an individual. He'll anchor a site. He's changing some roles a bit here and there as well. He's not going to give you that firepower. He'll give you impact, but that's not the same thing, right? Impact and firepower are obviously different things. Although it's kind of, murky. We'll not get into that discussion. But, okay, Perfecto's not there. Hobbit. What is Hobbit actually doing in this roster? Genuine question, what is he? Because if Perfecto does support a supportive element, maybe he's taking more roles. So what is Hobbit's actual role? When in 2020 and 2021, he joined to this team, and his original kind of selling point and what made him so impactful and so exciting to watch is that he actually was a top player at that point in time. He wasn't just like an old star that was there for the veteran, impact. He actually had real in-game like stats, as well as that map 3 experienced player effect that you want from an old player who's won a major and has got all those accolades and stuff like that. So at Hobbit's, he's barely getting 1.0 ratings at this point. What is he doing on this team? You and I were both guessing at this point because the experience is there. You have Electronic and you have Perfecto. You don't need an experienced player anymore. His job is in danger, for sure, right? And so the firepower is not there either. We covered Perfecto. We covered Hobbit. We just talked about how Exile, he's underperforming. He's not really quite there yet. So he's like a 1.1 player. He's decent. He's not like your backbone as a rifler yet. And so you have Boomich, and Boomich is he's a bit better than Hobbit at this point because, his aggression, his impact, he's going in first and then a better player is behind him to get the trade, something like that. He's getting clutches more than Hobbit is at this point, but he's not a star fragger in any sense of the word. And so you kind of have Electronic as the only shining light of this team. From having basically a star-studded roster, what you thought was a star-studded roster, actually just ends up being Electronic and like half of Exile and 3 essentially supportive elements. And so there's just no power in this team whatsoever, right? It's nowhere near the super team that we once thought it was. And this is why I phrase it this way in terms of a roster move and a player waking up, or 2 roster moves, because it really depends, right? Right now, Hobbit is on the chopping block for sure in my eyes, because it seems like, you can potentially bank on Axel coming back. I think Electronic and Perfecto and Boomich, this Navi core is solid in this team, because if Boomich is the IGL, you don't really need to question him that much. He seems to be doing a good job. They seem to have a good synergy, just as they did all those years ago, 2 years ago, not that long ago, But then you have to question Hobbit and Exile, right? You expect Exile to be the fragging potential. You can replace Exile at this point, I'm not going to say Donk and Exile is a 1-for-1 role replacement, because it's not, but if you can somehow buy Donk, I mean, I don't know how, C9 should be out of money, but you and I both know miracles can happen. Apparently, C9 could afford some outrageous buyouts. Apparently, that's not true. But that aside, you can, even if you ignore Donk, you can definitely get some CIS riflers to replace players like Hobbit and players like Axile, right? And so if Axile comes back into form, then you replace Hobbit with a strong rifler, and then you cook, and then you have a good potential and backbone in this team. But, you know, if that doesn't happen, Axile can get benched, and you can get another star player to fill that slot. But if neither of those things end up happening, C9 is just gonna flounder and gonna, you know, it's gonna be the upset team taken to the maximum, because they're always gonna have an edge over the team that has an OPA just because of the uniqueness factor. But that same factor means that averaged out over the course of every LAN match that they're going to play against better teams, against even worse teams, it's just going to consistently be worse overall, even if on an individual like matchup. Like in a group stage, C9 could probably beat like Vitality. Just because in like MR12 best of 3 even, you could have an individual like Axel can have a map where it looked like he's back, and Boomich is finding the entry somehow, which means that Electronic is on like a 1.7 rating in the best of 3, and you think it's gonna work, and you don't need an OPA. And so that one match where they find an upset might fool them into thinking, let's keep it, but it's not gonna happen, let me tell you that, right? And all of this, right, all this waffling I've been doing about Hobbit, Axel, you know, no OPA, Boomich, Electronic, we haven't even talked about gla1ve. What's he doing on this team, right? Is he even relevant to the performance of this team? Because it seems like the actual impact is coming from the calling of the mid-rounds, which he obviously can't really take a part in. It doesn't seem like his setups have really done any work, and he's the one championing the fact that they don't need an OPA. He's saying we're gonna stick with this. Is that true? Is he just saying it because he has to say it because that's what the team lineup is for the moment, and it's like an upper management thing, like the CEO of Cloud9, Jack, I believe, he just comes down and says, we have no money for you to get an OPA. Spin it. He's just sure, gla1ve just goes, Shuro is benched, that's fine, we don't need an OPA, we're not getting an OPA, we're moving on. I don't know, that's a, you know, conspiracy theory or whatever, that's not my take at all, but let's round it off. I think it's a common consensus. We'll say, you know, it's a 90% opinion, because I think most people know, like at a surface level, you don't need to be a genius to understand. You have no OPA, your team is limited, you're going to keep failing until, you know. And if you bring up like 2019 Liquid, that is the firepower on that team is not the firepower in this team. On that team, you had NAF, Twists, Elige, and then you had the role player Stewie 2K. Now, even if you want to compare Stewie and Boomich, right, you can potentially compare that, but even then, it's not a great comparison. Stewie was still pretty good at that point, right? But if you compare the rest, right, you have what? NAF, Twist, and Elige as your star riflers. And so, what's your star riflers here? Okay, you have Elige and Electronic. That's a fair comparison, you know. Electronic may be better than Elige at that point. You're comparing a 1-to-1. Who knows, right? Let's say it's a 1-to-1. Okay, Twist and NAF. Who have we got? We've got Axile and Perfecto. That's not looking so good in current form, boys, because NAF was a very, very great player at that point, and Twist was a fantastic individual player, even if he wasn't, you know, the greatest in that entire team. He was still very, very good. And Twist in that team is better than Hobbit now. It's better than Boomich. It's probably better than Axile is right now. And so Nitro is the OPA. We're still putting up consistent like role player solutions when he needed to. And, you know, everyone remembers famous overpass clips, stuff like that. He's not even comparable to Boomich as an OPA. Let's not even start that conversation, all right? If you think that you're on copium levels beyond that, which we can detect with the human sensory organs, all right? So we'll end it at that. Most people understand. That's why it's a 90% opinion. So we'll move on, right? The 50% take. And this take is talking about an in-game leader, a famous in-game leader, one that's been touted as the best in-game leader of all time for a while, up until Kerrigan took that crown from him. Most people would agree. When he got that major, he got that Grand Slam, and he found that consistency with the FaZe lineup. We're talking about gla1ve, and we're talking about ENCE. And my 50% take is that gla1ve will be out of ENCE within 2024. All right, within the year, he'll be benched, or he'll get bought out somehow, or he'll leave. Whichever one happens, one of them will gonna happen. That's I think it's a 50% whether it does or doesn't, but I'm gonna say 50% chance. I'm taking the heads in that equation and hoping, or rather betting on, no gambling, that gla1ve is gonna be out. Now, this comes off the back, we have to mention the context, right, of the recent transfer news, the implosion of the ENCE roster, where Nerds is going to Heroic and Senpai and Madden are joining up with Snappy and going to Falcons, right? And the ENCE organization brought out the core of 9, which is gla1ve, Kylar, and Hades, which probably is the better individuals from that team, in my opinion, but either way, they link up with Diha, or Duha, however you pronounce that name, right? Who's already in ENCE, and gla1ve as the lone Dane amongst a coach who is Polish in Kubin and an entire team of Polish players. And that's already a tough challenge, even if you ignore what I'm going to get into with the whole language issues, both for him and for the team, the cultural issues, so on and so forth. Let's start with this, right? So, for the time being, they benched the IGL, and Hades was calling as an OPA in 9 before the buyout happened and the transfers happened here, right? And, Kubin's Polish. He's probably the best and most notable Polish coach. He's been doing it for a while. Neo and Taz have started recently, but Kubin's been at it for years at this point and has got the pedigree to garner that respect, right? And it's rare already to have such an overwhelming cultural difference between your in-game leader and the entire rest of your team. Not only is your entire player count, right? All of them are Polish. Your coach is also Polish. So where does that leave you if, gla1ve goes to the toilet, he comes back, the entire team is conversing in Polish because that's where they're comfortable. Even Kubin's probably more comfortable in that, right? Even if he was just coaching an international lineup not too long ago. Everyone knows, right? If you're in an international lineup, but the players who don't speak the same language die, and the only people left in the server are the people who speak the same language as each other, they're going to speak that language. We know it because of lineups like the international lineup with Megaskin Dupree, the Vitality lineup, where we know that if one half of the team died, they would play on the same bomb sites, have the synergy. If one half of the team died, the other half would go back to French or Danish, stuff like that, right? And this is already tough, because now that if gla1ve dies, the entire team switches to Polish to increase the efficiency of the team. What's gla1ve supposed to do? He doesn't understand, right? You're not going to convince me that gla1ve's going to learn Polish to stay in ENCE. That's beyond my pay grade as a take, all right? So that's already tough. And now it's a 50-50 opinion, because there is a valid argument that this is a temporary roster for the major sticker and the invite, because Hades, Griffin, and Kyla, they carry the 9 RMR invite. They're going to get invited to the RMR because they were top 16 at the Blast Paris Major, right? And that means that you can easily consider that a temporary move. They're essentially hoodwinking the 2 worst players on this lineup. They're going to bench them afterwards, and they're going to pick up 2 international players. They're going to keep, whoever's the best. If Hades and gla1ve underperform, but Kyla rises to the occasion, and Diha, he's probably going to stay. He's a consistent piece enough, right? Then you keep gla1ve, Diha, and whoever's the best out of those 3. That becomes your new core, and you pick up other players. No doubt that's a possibility where you only keep 2 Polish players. So the core of the 5-man is not Polish, so it doesn't end up being a problem, culture-wise overall, right? But it all depends on the results as well. And you can just as easily decide gla1ve is not worth it to build around. Now, I'm going to put my personal opinion on the line here, right? The way I see it, it's so much easier for the ENCE organization to just switch to a full Polish team with Diha added in, right? Who was a piece that was international for a while, who wasn't playing in the Polish lineups. He talked about it on some podcasts earlier, I think a year ago, maybe even less than that, talking about how the primary problem with Polish CS is that there's good pieces here and there. They're not all on the same team. They don't have an experienced leader behind them. They don't have tutelage of the best players. Because one of the problems was that the VP lineup, legendary lineup for so long, right? They stayed together for so long that the best players didn't end up joining that team. They never broke apart, so all the experience stayed in that team. And so it didn't, spread out. there was no waterfall or trickle-down effect. And now they're all kind of playing catch-up. They're all fighting amongst each other. There's too many politics and, inter-team problems. You don't end up buying the best players. But with ENCE, right? ENCE is a big name already at this point in CS. They're going to have a big pull, not only because they're the best team, but because they have the scouting and the experience of gla1ve, right? And it will be way easier to scout a good Polish team when you're at the top already and you're intentionally scouting for a Polish team. When it's not just, players talking to players, when it's actually from the top down a good managerial stance, you could probably make a better Polish team and keep the advantage of your native tongue in the team, right? You already have 4 of the 5 players needed for a full lineup. And another thing that a lot of people might miss, which is also influencing my opinion, is that Hades and Nine in general, even before the IGO was benched, Minio, right? They wanted to emulate the heroic style. And they wanted to kind of follow in that, left, right, up, down, executes, dynamic style that made heroic so powerful. And they, with a national lineup, could emulate that style, especially if Hades wants to go for the Acadian IGO AWP style, which I think he could actually do with the tutelage and experience of a good coach like gla1ve is, right? We know gla1ve's a good coach. We've seen his results over the years in Apex. He's had the experience for that. And Diha kind of fell by the wayside in this ENCE team. He was a role player. He could be given a bit more focus. He was somewhat of a fragger back in the earlier days. You can bring that emphasis back, improve his numbers. I think it's entirely possible, especially in the native tongue, right? I'm going to emphasize that point a lot because I think it's something that's going to be missing. Like a lot of people, I think some people were talking about this, that the international team, especially at the RMR close qualifier, the invites, the only national team or the only English-speaking, non-English-speaking team is Bad News Eagles or Guild Eagles. And so I think if you genuinely work towards a common goal with that in mind, it will just be a better option to not try gla1ve, right? I think there's a lot of gambles involved in here. So let's talk about the gla1ve side of the equation for a second, because we've talked about, I think there's potential for the Polish scene. I think if you have a top-down vision, so on and so forth, I think it's really a good idea to build around that there instead of building around gla1ve. Now, what's wrong or what's right with gla1ve so far, right? It's been a small sample size. Individual form, he started off a bit rough, but then he kind of evened out to an acceptable kind of 0.95-ish range, which is pretty decent for an IGL nowadays. Nowadays, IGLs have had a rough, go of it with CSGO, but CS2 is liable to change that. We've seen a lot of improvement. Apex is having a resurgence in form, unlike that which we've seen before. And if Apex can do it, gla1ve can probably do it, but, he doesn't have the team, of course, right? So it remains to be seen. I want to say it's okay, individual form. I'm not going to put it against it. I'm not going to put it for him. We'll leave it like that for his individual form. So far, small sample size, but the T sides, I've seen a few good maps or halves, especially on Nuke. Nuke was the bread and butter of gla1ve back in Australia's days, years ago. At this point, actually years ago. But notable point is, I think, the international adaptation, him switching language, switching his protocols, learning the new game, is going to end up costing him more in the short term, even if he could do it given the time. And this is another thing, which is the out-of-game factors of ENCE as an organization. They need the sticker money more than anything else, right? That's one of the primary factors of how ENCE works, because they don't rely so much on VC money. They're a team-building based squad. They need to make the major for that income, right? Year on year. And so it's actually fairly doable, I might even say easy, for them to build a Polish squad to consistently make the major and maybe even be like top 15, top 10, edging on top 10, right? Because that's kind of where Nine was before they choked at LAN and didn't get the experience in time and then lost confidence, so on and so forth. So I think ENCE could break the barrier that Nine couldn't because they have that experience as an org to build around them, and with the coach and with Diha, who has some experience already, right? And so if you think about it from the organizational perspective, it's going to be very difficult to find a squad for gla1ve to actually build a team better than what essentially NiKo is. Let's think about it that way, right? If you're building a case for gla1ve, a pro gla1ve argument for him to stay in ENCE, you're essentially saying the gla1ve squad will be better than an upgraded 9 squad. Because there's no doubt, it is basically 9 with upgrades, is what ENCE is going to be if they go full Polish, right? And so, can you really make the case like more than 50-50? I don't think so. I think it's actually a bit stronger. I think ENCE should go for a Polish lineup. Because it's also very dependent on the contract length and division of ENCE, which is more out of the game factors. It's unclear whether they would be comfortable with, benching gla1ve, because I don't think gla1ve is going to get bought out. Let's be honest, right? Because if he fails on this ENCE project to really make an impact, he's not going to get bought out by anyone. If the contract is, a 2-year contract, they signed it, near the end of 2023, he's going to be on the bench for a while. At that point, what's he really going to do? What's the vision of ENCE? Are they okay with missing a major if they're going to build around him? I don't think they are, because of the way that they've spoken about their finances. Because, like a team like, for example, Vitality, and of course they were going to make the major, they have gla1ve, right? But for even a team like G2, G2 is a good example, because G2 didn't make the major, but then they managed to keep NiKo on board. They managed to still, we'll talk about NiKo next take. Don't worry, NiKo's getting some, all right? But they're not completely giving up on it. They're continuing with the CS project even after missing a major, because that's kind of part of their philosophy compared to ENCE. I think ENCE would like the consistency over the peaks, and they would have no problem going back to a 10 to 15-ish range rather than with a top 5, top 3, top 1 that they were before, because I don't think they're going to get back to those heights with gla1ve necessarily. And so why try to make a risky move and go international and make your team worse in the long run, or even in the short term? Overall, it's just a disadvantage in my eyes to keep gla1ve. So let's talk about, briefly before I move on, right? Let's talk about where could gla1ve go after this? Where is he going to find his form? I think internationally, he could be like a top 20 IGO for a team like, here or there. But that's not really impressive, right? You'd want him to go to a Danish team and build up a Danish, super squad. But it's really bad for the Danish scene right now, because Heroic's going international. If Heroic stayed national, he could have been a prospect for them. But that's not the case. He's not going back to Astralis, that's for certain, right? Because they got gla1ve, and it seems like gla1ve is there for the long, long term. And he's not getting any worse individually anyway, right? So, where's he going to go? The best team after Astralis is Preci. Now, I'm going to let that sink in. The best team after Astralis is Preci and Denmark. That's rough. NiKo has just left that team. What's really going to happen there? No one knows. Is he better than that TMB IGL who's young and has chance to develop in CS2? Maybe he's better on LAN, but are they going to risk the loss in performance temporarily when they have a chance to make the major, for example, without changing? So far, a lot to be seen, a lot of question marks, and I think he's out of ENCE within the next year. Simple as that. Now, here's my 10% take. Now, this is the hot take, and this is perhaps the, some people would say this is not controversial. This is just obvious, but I think it's fairly controversial if you think about what I'm actually saying here, right? So, I'm gonna take a quick detour and do a bit of storytelling to set my scene here, right? We're talking about NiKo, the famous, rifler. Number 1 rifler for a while. Most people would say that's the case, right? And the thing about NiKo is he's a star player. And the thing about star players is that they fight to maintain the aura that they give off in the server when they face off against, 3 players of the opposing team. They press tab, they see NiKo on the server. It's a 1v3. And they're terrified. They don't go check the HOTV rating and they don't go, oh shit, NiKo's on a 1.3 this event? Oh man, that's crazy. No, they see NiKo and they're scared, right? And that's what star players really fight for. That's what makes the difference between a star player and a really good individual, is that you're terrified of the star player when you see him in the server. And when that leaves you, it's really bad. To put it in simple terms, I'm going to explain it a bit more, but let's start with an example, right? Simple, before he, benched himself and took a break. It's a great example. Most people would agree, Simple, quote unquote, he fell off. Rip Bozo, L, etc. Statistically, he was still a top player. He was still a top AWPer, top rifler, top 7, top 10, in that range. Most teams would love to have that. Think about how in demand a player like Sunpies might be. And he's not Simple, right? Sunpies and Simple, you would say they should be about as good as each other. But the eye test of Simple, it's rough, right? The aura has left Simple. What does that mean, right? Part of winning clutches, part of getting kills is the aura. Your existence causing a difference in play. For example, recently Rops in CS2. Players, they see Rops, they get scared. They overthink. They try to play too perfect with the exact utility that you want, and when you play too perfect, you're liable to just simple plays. You're trying to play the perfect round, you create gaps that previously wouldn't have existed because you're going too far. You miss timings because you're overthinking stuff. So Rops can get an unwinnable clutch because he has that aura. I'm going to say it again, aura, right? And so once it fades, people treat you like any other player. A good player, right? They're going to flash you off normally, but they're not going to be as scared of you as they are if you have that effect. And so you lose that side of the equation, which was favoring you silently the entire time. You lose the Simple effect, the, NiKo effect, where people think NiKo's going to one-tap me, NiKo's going to one-tap me, I'm not going to peek this angle like this, I'm going to peek it differently. And so you peek it like an idiot instead of peeking it normally. And it actually makes it worse for you, and NiKo gets the one-tap, and you think, I told you NiKo would one-tap me. You don't even think about the fact that you're playing into it now. Of course, part of it is you're good enough to take advantage of it all the time because you're actually the good player. It's obviously, majority of it is down to you, but a strong percentage is the star player aura. So what's left, right, is your own control over your performance, your own skills, your actual stats, right? Now, recently in CS2, up until the Blast World Final, a couple days ago, we didn't see the crazy maps that we're used to seeing from NiKo. It was okay. And I'm not saying okay by NiKo standards. I'm saying he was a good player. But when I say he was a good player, I'm saying it like across all players. I'm not saying as number one rifler NiKo. Number one rifler NiKo, that was terrible, right? No other way to put it. And then we had that one nuke game recently. People lost their minds. I lost my mind a little bit as well. I was watching that. I was saying, is NiKo back? Is he him again? But the next series, when you needed NiKo, completely uninspiring. Lost it. And you saw he was trying new things. He was changing how he peeks. He was changing how he sprays. He was maybe trying to return to some kind of form. Maybe the top 20 player in the world still, right? In the future. But my hot take, 10% take, is that NiKo has descended as we knew him from CSGO. He's descended. Obvious point, right? His numbers have dropped off. You don't need me to tell you. You can put the HO2V filters on, do your own checking on that. Is that 1.09, 1.10, 1.11? Those aren't NiKo numbers. You see those numbers, you're worried, right? Now, another point. The eye test isn't great for him. Now, it's not as bad as like Simple's was, comparatively speaking, but it's still pretty rough. It shows, in some rounds, he's not as confident taking the duel as he was before. He's uncomfortable with how certain things feel. He still has his great moments. You saw multiple 2Ks in Banana. You're thinking, this is what he was like. This is exactly how NiKo performed. Is he back? Again. But in new scenarios, with some CS2 moments, you can call it, it feels like it gets to NiKo in ways it never did before. The game affects him in ways that previously he was in control of completely. Now, if you look at a player like ENCE, it's almost a reverse effect, right? ENCE, relative to his prior form, is back. He's given his spots, he feels the game, he's got the impact in ways that he didn't before, because he's got that confidence. But NiKo, He should have all his spots. That's the whole point of him being in that team, right? That's NiKo's team. I'm not saying, conspiracy theory of NiKo choosing the individuals, he's given some interviews. I believe him on some level that he's not that, all-encompassing, controlling figure in the team, but he should have the roles that he wants. That's the whole point of him being NiKo, right? He should have the comfort in the team. So, what else do you look at? What else is there? Now, majority of people would say, 90% of people would say, give him time. Give him the space to perform, to find his plays, to find his NiKo impact again. And that may well be correct. But I'm looking at the other great players that we have, right? gla1ve. He had a few really bad maps in Sydney compared to what we expect from him. Still a 1.14, by the way, but bad for gla1ve. People, he wasn't great. He came back. He's the number one player. No contest, right? ropz. ropz was a good player before. He was a good player after. Now, he didn't really have a troublesome transition, but he was, greatness stayed greatness in that case. Monesi, he looked about the same. He had a really hot performance at the beginning. He kind of cooled off to be his own, top but still inconsistent self. He's about as good as he was before, in my opinion, right? But he's transferred his skill, and he's good. Spinks is good. Flit is good. Strong rifler in both games. So, how long are we going to give NiKo? I see no reason, personally, to expect the aura to return, aside from throwback land performances, or for a series, or for one playoffs. You get the experienced player effect and the potential that he always had as an experienced player on LAN, right? Kind of like what Rain has done, Rain-esque, you can call it that. Because they play similar roles. Generally speaking, similar style of gameplay. To be clear, let me explain. I'm not saying NiKo is terrible. NiKo's not bad. NiKo could still win a major in CS2. It doesn't mean he can't. He can still win big trophies, but when you're him, when you're NiKo with the aura, you hold the keys within yourself to unlock those doors, to have those performances like he tried to do in Stockholm, to have crazy ratings, to bring the clutches upon yourself as the best. But if you don't have that, then you need to be in the great team. You need a team build. Now, I'm not going to get into NiKo and team building, right? NiKo and team building, it's a rough position. Nexa for JKS? Hooksy? What's going on there, right? Whether you believe he has control or not, the fact is he could have control if he tried to make his case for it. And if he doesn't have control, that's still a choice. So he's, whether by consequence or by choice, team building hasn't been the strongest suit for NiKo. Basically for 5 years, you could say it that way. So, I'm taking the stance. He's descended. We're not going to ever see him as good as we saw him at his best in CSGO. And, maybe even not that close to it. In theory, CS2 is the game for NiKo. The riflers are strong. The AWP is, different. I'm not going to say worse. I think there's room for it still. So you're thinking NiKo should win, but I think he could be relegated to a top 20 player that doesn't have the aura. It doesn't have the NiKo effect. And I don't think he'll be back. Now, I could be very wrong on this, and, next year he's just NiKo again, and then I look like an idiot. But seeing what I see, knowing what I know, that's just how I feel about NiKo in the game. So, that's the 10% take. This is the end of the show. If you have thoughts, you have concerns, you want to join as a guest, you think you're notable or not notable, I'll take anyone. To be clear, we're starting this, I'm not trying to be like, oh, can I get simple on the show? Simple, what's your 10% take, simple? No, I'll take, if you just want to have a conversation and it happens to be a recorded one, I'm in for that. If you want to have a discussion about it, you can join the Discord. Should have it linked below. Be sure to subscribe for the future podcasts for random gaming content if you're into that, whatever. I'm not going to cross the streams of content here, but I upload it in the same place. So, buy one, get one free in that case. And, follow my Twitter for more esports centric content. Check my Substack. I should have that link below. Should have an article coming out before the end of the year because I have one a month, roughly speaking. I haven't have the idea yet, but I'm looking for, potentially looking at the economy in CS2, looking at the guns, looking at maybe a return to the AWPing article. Probably not. I don't want to double up too much, but lots of things to think about. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you later. Enjoy.